Well, welcome to our second edition of the We Don't Have to Talk About This podcast. Today we're meeting at the Common Market on Buckystown Pike in Frederick, Maryland. I want to thank our hosts at the Common Market. I've been a member of the Common Market for years, and I encourage everyone else. It's great to be an owner in the grocery store to make sure that you're getting good quality product. So I encourage people to participate in that. We are going to be talking tonight. I have three guests. I'll introduce them briefly, but allow them to do further introductions themselves. Andy Solages, who's a member of Indivisible Frederick and was the suggester for our topic tonight. We've got Dr. Ann Hofmann here from Frederick Community College, and we have Cassie Day, who is a Frederick County Public School teacher and a candidate for the Board of Education next year here in Frederick County. And so our topic tonight is going to be set up by the book Fugitive, Pedagogy by Jarvis Gibbons. I will tell you that if you are interested in getting a copy of this book, you are not going to find it at the Barnes & Noble or at the local bookstores here in Frederick, but you can order it online. And if you do so, I encourage you not to order it through Amazon.com. I would encourage you instead to go to bookshop.org. You can then pick the local bookshop of your choice that will get a share of the profits instead of Jeff Bezos. And I would recommend you choose Eliza's House Bookstore in Hagerstown, although you're certainly welcome to choose any other local bookstore that you want. I know there are a lot of fans of Curious Iguana here in Frederick. I will also caution you, if you get the book, be prepared. This is not a light and breezy read. I will say that as I read through it, I found that I worked through it and I needed a highlighter. So it is very much an academic book. But I'm going to let Andy introduce that book as the topic, and then that will lead us to a broader discussion of censorship in education and how that is impacting us today. So with this book, just to set up a framework, the main conversation will be on the issues that we're dealing with today in censorship and in education. So Andy, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the book.
All right, thank you, Andrew. So my name is Andy Solages. I'm an organizer with Indivisible Frederick Forward, and I met Andrew at some events and inquired about some topics that might be of interest to the general public, and one of them that we came up with was this book right here, and the concept of fugitive pedagogy. So, as Andrew mentioned, the book is written by Jarvis Gibbons, and what it does is it centers the story of Carter G. Woodson, an educator, historian, institution builder, and his association for the study of Negro life and history. So he centers Woodson and his organization as a means of describing a tradition that actually precedes Woodson and follows him, and it continues down through Black studies, Africana studies today. So fugitive pedagogy is an African American education tradition that affirms the dignity of Black people, affirms the human potential of Black people, and does so while building all the academic skills and so forth, while recognizing threats, external threats, and structural threats. So, for example, earlier iterations would be under slavery, right? So you have people who would steal a lesson, as they would say, right? So they would, there would be consequences, particularly after certain rebellions like the Stoner Rebellion, for enslaved people to learn how to read, to be knowledgeable in certain ways. So, but still, people committed to education would find ways to learn by whatever means. So Woodson's relatives were among those. So Woodson was born to a family of people who had been enslaved. His first teachers were his uncles, and they taught him in this small schoolhouse in what was it? I believe it was Virginia, but don't quote me. So he learned from his uncles initially, and then later on in his life, he became a coal miner, right? And then he would learn from the coal miners, who many of whom weren't literate, but he learned the concept of communal literacy. So over time, we're seeing this tradition grounded in African American culture just provide a means of resisting threats from the outside, and then Woodson would carry this on in his professional life. You know, he goes on, he gets his first degree, then a second degree, a master's degree, then he gets another degree from. He becomes the second African American to get a degree from Harvard after W.E. Du Bois. But even after getting all of this education, he realizes that he's been miseducated in a way, in that what he's learned has excluded Black people, Negroes at the time, from human potential, from human history. There are no, as Mary Bethune said later on, there were no monuments to Black people within the education. So Black people were just completely left out of it. And so education became yet another hostile environment. So Woodson was an institution builder, right? So this included the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, that's the ASNLH, in 1915. He, in that organization, really elevated fugitive pedagogy to a professional standard, so including the communal literacy, including maybe feigned compliance, which we'll use that anecdote from Tessie McGee involving teacher Tessie McGee that is really useful in illustrating how the concept would play out with the feigned compliance component. Covert study would be another, and also dissident politics. That's another element. So, because as a professional standard, fugitive pedagogy pay attention to developing academic skills, the conventional reading, writing, and so forth. But at the same time, that attention to resisting oppression and to recognizing the humanity of Black people was a central part of it. So here's an example of how this might play out in the feigned compliance example. All right, so the book opens up with Tessie McGee reading to her class. This is in the early 1930s, 1933, 1934. So she's operating in Webster Parish, Louisiana. So the all-white Department of Education has given instructions that teachers are to keep a pre-approved outline of the information that they are teaching students, right? So and so it's meant to provide no ability to influence the curriculum for Black teachers, right? So what Tessie McGee does is she's connected to Carter G. Woodson's association, and so I'm going to read this for you. She used Carter G. Woodson's book, probably The Negro in History, and she would have Carter G. Woodson's book on her lap, and she would read from Woodson's book to her students. Now, commonly in Black schools, you would have either the principal, who might be Black, or you would have just random powerful white people in the community coming in to observe their Negro schools. So when she would read from Woodson's book, which would be in her lap, and then if someone was coming in to monitor her, because surveillance was such a big thing, she would just lift her eyes up and read from the approved educational material, right? And then as soon as the person who was doing surveillance left, then her eyes would turn back to the book, and she would continue. So the students were witnesses and participants in it. So they witnessed. It was a physical thing. It was also the intellectual element. All of these elements are present, and it's all done. And it's a collective endeavor, and that's another component of future pedagogy, where education is not just an individual pursuit; it is a community pursuit that is meant to elevate the people. You want me to keep going?
Well, let's take it from there. I think that really sets up a really good conversation. And if we look at where we're at today, what we see is much of the progress that we have made over the last 75 years. We are seeing backsliding. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the actions that have been taken by the current administration, I had somebody that I worked with that called me and said what they did is they took all of the black people in the organization and took them down to the cafeteria, gave them a free lunch of fried chicken, and then gave them the paperwork saying that they were all going to be put on administrative leave because they participated in the DEI program.
Sure.
We look around today in terms of censorship, and we see censorship occurring not only in the fact that they're withholding data, they're firing the statisticians that are reporting numbers they don't like, they're removing from government websites information about climate change, information about health, and they're trying to influence higher education in this country by threatening to withhold funding. And so I want to introduce now Dr. Ann Hofmann with FCC to talk a little bit about it from what we are seeing today with reference to higher education and where we're seeing that censorship they're attempting to apply that censorship to higher education.
Thank you. So I think it's important first to recognize that higher education in the U.S. was never built for all people. It was never intended to, the bones of the structures of higher education in the U.S. are not built to be equitable. And so over the past, at least I would say 50 years, there's been movement towards things like we now know as culturally responsive education and practices that we have good educational and social science evidence that shows that these practices work for all students in advancing them in many ways. And the backlash that we're experiencing right now in higher ed is really targeting those disciplines that are doing the critical work of trying to unsettle the progress that has been made. So we're very much seeing, you said backlash, we're seeing a reactionary return to really the origins of U.S. higher education system. And I think that it's important for us to remember that, to recognize it, that this is not new. This is fundamentally part of our history. And so I think the erasure of or the attempt, I think it's also really, really helpful to remember that we cannot erase what we already know and what we already know works. And so, but the attempt to erase practices and curricula that are unevenly distributed in the United States, right? I mean, curricula is not the same everywhere. The federal government does not control curriculum in different places. And so, but what we are seeing is this wave of attack on, in higher education, like I said, critical fields like race studies, gender studies, some history departments, depending on where you are, definitely some sociology is really under attack. And the current administration is going after the big dogs, right? Like the Ivies as a sort of quaking for everyone else to listen, your funding can be pulled too. So yes, started with grant funding to big research universities. We've seen Columbia fall victim to this, and we've seen, quite frankly, certain universities pander to and break under the pressure of having that funding rescinded. We've seen presidents fired. The University of Virginia, we're seeing the George Mason University in Virginia, the president has not been fired, actually was fabulously standing up to Trump and his threats, quite frankly. But I think what's really, really tough is that for those of us working in regional four-year universities or working in community colleges like I do, the people that are going to be most hurt by the cuts are working class and middle class families and students who are trying to get an education, because what is also happening in higher education is Trump and the Trump administration is cutting like TRIO programs, C-Campus, which is childcare. It also means parents in school. So targeting those students that historically have never had access, and the funding that has demonstrated improvements for those students, and removing access to higher education, which we know is a pillar of the creation of generational wealth in this country. So it's a direct target at the communities that were never intended to be included in the advancement in higher education. So that's sort of a big, sweeping, I think, sort of summary of where we are in higher education. I will say, for me, the importance in the classroom and the excitement in the classroom of students to talk about this, even in maybe tentative ways. It's really important that we continue to reveal what's happening with facts and also explain how misinformation is distorting really what is happening before our eyes at the federal and state level. So,
yeah, great. I think that's very good in terms of setting up some additional conversation, because I think we need to, I think higher education is one of the places where we're seeing deliberate pressure being put, and so some of what we need to do is think about how we should encourage those institutions to respond. Mm-hmm. We've seen some institutions, you mentioned George Mason famously standing up. We've seen other institutions that have just totally capitulated at the first glance, and others who are self-suppressing and avoiding controversial studies. Unfortunately, I look at international relations, and some of the work in terms of cyber attacks the research has stopped because they don't have they don't want to be crossing that line. And so some of the great researchers in the area of Russian interference and misinformation and disinformation are being denied the opportunity to continue their research simply out of fear. So we recognize that that's there, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to encourage those institutions, particularly ones that we have a relationship with, to resist that kind of pressure. I also want to bring into the conversation Cassie Day. Cassie Day is a Frederick County public school teacher. I'm a proud graduate of Frederick County Public Schools, and I appreciate the work of the school teachers here in Frederick County. Cassie is also a candidate for the Board of Education, so that's the way that we are able to protect the gains that we have made, is to ensure that we have good people on the Board of Education. So there are several good candidates who have already announced, and I know we've got a long time before that election, but I encourage you to make sure that you vote in the next election and ensure that we vote all the way down the ticket to the school board. Casey, what are you seeing in terms of Frederick County schools and in terms of public education in general as we look at censorship and education?
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of the same trends that Anne was talking about in higher education. The funding push that's coming down from the federal government pushing onto the states with the threats of cutting funding have made some of our states make decisions to remove diversity information, to whitewash our curriculum, to, in Oklahoma, they've recently put in a test that any teacher coming in from a state that they consider too liberal has to pass the test to make sure you're looking at American exceptionalism appropriately in order to even be able to get a job in those states. I looked at one of those tests today, and I could have passed it if I chose to, but the questions would not be ones that I would have passed if I had looked at them and answered them honestly, because they were particularly misleading. But we are seeing it here in Maryland. We actually are in a pretty okay space at this point in time. Dr. Wright, our state superintendent, I serve on the Teacher Advisory Council for the state, and she has been taking a pretty firm stance against being unwilling to remove the diversity pieces here in Maryland. In this past year, at the state level, they passed legislation which requires all counties to follow the state curriculum in our public schools. And that was in response to counties such as Carroll, who had removed portions of the health curriculum so they wouldn't have to teach about our LGBTQ students. And we're talking about how to change some of our history curricula as well to remove pieces that they didn't necessarily want to make people feel bad. So there's been a lot of pushback, places like Florida and other places where they talk about teaching both sides of slavery and the benefits of that, as well as both sides of the Holocaust and the benefits of that. And so that is nothing more than pandering to people who want to kind of erase what actually happened in our society. In regards, talking about, the teacher who would hold her book in her lap and the other on her table, that kind of surveillance is happening here in all across the country. They've set up, locations to be able to tattle on teachers, to be able to screenshot. I've had several different posts, relatively benign social media posts, screenshotted, sent in, and, calls. I know friends who've had calls for their jobs, because of just very basic things that have been posted over the last handful of years. But we are seeing, we've been seeing pushes from the right as they talk about critical race theory, something that's never been a part of our curriculum, but they think that it's there because we actually talk about actual historical events that happen.
This is another case, critical race theory, which was never intended to be taught at the K through 12 level. It is in fact more of a sociological and a legal area of study to look at the fact, and it is a fact, that our criminal justice system produces unequal outcomes.
Yes.
And that's just the truth and the data. And if we don't look to understand what reality is, if we don't look to understand why that reality exists, we cannot be prepared to address the problems that we have. Burying your head in the sand is never an appropriate solution to problems that we're facing. And frankly, the problem of race in our country goes back to our original founding. And I like to find my guidance in the Declaration of Independence that says all men are created equal. I believe all people are created equal, and not where we wound up with the Constitution, where equal does not mean 3/5 of a person.
Yeah.
So we know that from our very founding, we've had a problem with race, and that we've made tremendous strides. We did not get as far as we needed to get, but we are not willing to go back. I am not willing to go back. And I think that most of the people that you see who are active and involved in the resistance movement are people who are unwilling to go back. These are changes that people fought for, people died for. And we're not willing to just say, oh, no, we're gonna walk away from that.
Well, I mean, censorship, even at the elementary, middle, high school levels and primary education, it really just protects the people in power. If we don't provide our students with the appropriate and complete understanding of our history and what has happened, then they're not prepared to move into that world as adults and be able to respond and to work on those types of things. So by continuing to allow our students and frankly require our students to learn a diverse history of our country and an accurate history of our country, we would be doing them a significant disservice. I think you would find that, in the schools here, there are a number of teachers who are doing that, not feigned compliance, because our curriculum is very complete here at Frederick County. But I teach computer science, and what you were talking about, Andrew, with the criminal justice system, we talk a lot about AI, and we take a look at, we could go through just the basics, but I take my class into an in-depth look into the ethics of AI, particularly looking at some of the formula and the programs that were initially used to look at recidivism in the courts and how some of those were eventually thrown out after many, many years of use. We do simulations with our medical, looking at medical information and how they make decisions at triage based on information, but that's primarily based on white men and the information that's there, so different people are triaged differently. And honestly, some of that, sometimes I teach it, but I'm waiting for the time when I get, surveilled at that moment for someone to come in, even though it is just accurate information.
Yeah, so just think about what we're saying here. So one thing that I continually have in my head is that authoritarians, all oppressors of all sorts, they are all about freedom and liberty. They love those words, but it's about freedom and liberty for themselves. And in order to have that freedom and liberty, they want to operate without challenge. And so that is why they will try to strip history, and that's why they will try to, they'll attack museums. That's why they'll surveil teachers. That's why they'll, try to get professors fired and threaten in other ways. So this is just part of how they operate, and there's precedent in our history. So the thing is, when we're looking at authoritarianism, this is a return to authoritarian, or depends on how you look at it, a continuation of what has always been. So when you're looking at Fugitive Pedagogy and what Carter G. Woodson did, and all of the individuals who were involved, I just want to highlight an element that women were a significant part of this organization. Chloe Bethune was president for 15 years, last 15 years of Woodson's life, and she was a close collaborator, and Nanny Helen Burroughs and others. But the thing about it is, these teachers, that's tradition. This tradition started under slavery, continued all through Woodson's organization, through the association, and then influenced the leaders that we might look to from just from previous generations even down to now. So the book mentions Angela Davis seeing Black Negro History Week celebrations featuring Harriet Tubman. She identifies her grandmother with Harriet Tubman. That you have John Lewis. He remembers Woodson's celebrations for Negro History Week, which I realized we didn't talk about, which is probably explains so the guests didn't know. So Carter G. Woodson, it was and his association are the founders of what was Negro History Week, and it's now Black History Month. And the key thing to remember is Negro History Week was founded as a short period to demonstrate what was learned throughout the year. So that little bit of silliness that comes around every year where people say, oh, they gave us the shortest month of the year. That's not actually it. The idea isn't to cram all of Black history into Black History Month. The idea is really to celebrate and elevate what is learned throughout the year. So it's supposed to be, that's what you're supposed to be discussing. It's not supposed to be just you Google something real quick or let ChatGPT produce something for you. This is supposed to be slow, seasoned knowledge that you've acquired over a year, and then you share and teach it. So Woodson with help from like Omega Sci-Fi, or fraternity, and a whole network of Black Educators Association. Had put on pageants and plays. People would do recitations. There'd be plays about Toussaint Louverture, because it was very common among Black educators to discuss the history of Haiti. That was started in the 19th century. That's what Black educators were doing back then, and also discussing African civilizations. It was very complete. It wasn't just localized to the United States. And so the thing about it is, this tradition started a long time ago, continued, and then it still exists now, because certain things that I grew up with come out of that tradition. So like when you hear "Lift Every Voice and Sing," that was propagated through the association. When you hear the stories of Nat Turner, like the takes of Nat Turner, this is what was preserved in this Black education tradition that was not at all present in the mainstream tellings of Nat Turner's life history. So the thing about it is, we are in an authoritarian moment, but so Woodson and everyone else in that long tradition from slavery on was resisting authoritarianism as well. Reconstruction, domestic terrorists destroyed that, and established Jim Crow. That is authoritarianism. We're talking about authoritarianism now. We don't need to just look overseas. We don't need to just look to Hitler. We don't need to just look to the Philippines or wherever. There's an authoritarian tradition here, but there's also a freedom fighter tradition, a liberation tradition here. And so right now, there's, first of all, to have that, to recognize it, because it never went away. It's always existed. That liberation tradition has always existed. We saw that play out with people who were influenced by that network of Black educators in the civil rights movement and so forth. Organizations like SNCC, organizations like the Panthers, and so forth. So it's time for this generation, for the people of this time, to find their place in the tradition that it certainly is generated by Black folk. But when this movement wins, then everyone ultimately wins. When the authoritarian white supremacist movement, white pathology movement wins, then everyone loses. Then it's because that's based on dehumanization, exploitation, and so forth. Right? So.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's really important to highlight that one of the major contributions of Gibbon's book is this reminder to people that this has been here all the time, alongside of the dominant curricula that have been in place, that have always been writing over things that have happened. And so I think that's a good reminder to everyone, even though this has not been in our curriculum really for very long and in all places, and it's been for a while.
So I want to pluck at that a little bit. To what degree is the solution to the problems that we're facing that we need to ensure, well, we want to make sure that we don't backslide, but to what degree can we replace with external solutions that which we find being taken away by the censorship and oppression? Is part of the solution to ensure that we have external opportunities to pass on this knowledge. Because that's really what education is. Education is about passing on knowledge.
Yep.
And it doesn't have to be done in the schoolhouse. It can be done externally.
Has to
And to what, from your perspective, to what degree was the fact that you had separate institutions that were involved in black education enablers of the development of that separate body of knowledge?
Well, I mean, that was very significant. But so you had some black institutions that were still controlled by white folk who didn't necessarily have our best interests in mind. So, like, for example, you think about what's his name, Chapman. I wrote it down somewhere. I always forget his name. Samuel. Wrote it down in. Samuel Chapman. That's what I was trying to think of. Founder of the Hampton Institute, right? So he was promoting industrial education. He was Booker T. Washington's mentor and so forth, right? But the thing about it is, he wanted to create efficient workers. He said, if we make the teachers, we will make the people. But what did he want? He wanted efficient workers, and then but elsewhere he said he wanted plotters and blockheads. So he wanted people who would be able to do labor, but would not advocate for their rights, right? So that was a big one, and then that of course informs the debate between Du Bois and Washington. Now Woodson, like many black educators and others, admired Washington to some degree because Washington, there was some element of, okay, we need to have our own institution. So what Washington was about that to some degree, but he also had the subservience element that Woodson found absolutely objectionable. And I'm with that, because Woodson was an institution builder, and what he believed was that black people needed to have institutions that were where you could create an environment where our humanity was recognized, elevated, cultivated, and and also the academic skills that we developed. And this would be done at a grassroots level, involving the community in a way where it's not. It can be still returning to the ideas of like communal literacy, like we were talking about earlier with Woodson and the coal miners. It's you're involving the entire community in the learning. So it's reading groups. You're all reading together. You're at different reading levels, different knowledge levels, but you're all engaging with the written word. You're all engaging with information. You're doing it through art. There are many different ways of engaging knowledge. So you need the independent institutions. You also need to challenge and try to shape the social structure, the larger institutions that govern the society. So you have to do both, and you do it in a way that includes as many people as possible, right? You don't do it in a way where it's just only just eggheads, just people who will sit around and read books like Fugitive Pedagogy. It has to be everyone can be involved, because that's how you make the knowledge a living thing, and not just something that's in a book that's discussed by a few. It's something that you need to spread out and within the living world for regular people. So the short answer is independent, yes. Free of control from the authoritarian state, yes. But then also you penetrate the authoritarian state, and you do malicious compliance, feigned compliance. You do all of that. And you also create parallel institutions as well. So like maybe you have, let's say they were to attack a museum and strip certain elements of history out. Maybe what you do is you organize tours of the museum where you are taking people through the museum and describing what was taken and what was taken. And maybe you'll even go deeper and talk about what was never there, because maybe the museum already had some narratives that were missing some crucial elements. So you do that, and so that's how you make use of what they've done. You can even use it as an organizing tool. I have some ideas about that. Maybe see if that bears fruit.
So I like that idea. I like the idea. I mean, we've seen proposals for stripping a lot of Black history out of our national park system. We happen to be here just a few miles away from Harper's Ferry, and Harper's Ferry is one of the targeted sites where they intend to remove a lot of the history of the African American experience. And I will say that while the raid on Harper's Ferry was an important historical event, I'm not sure that there's a convoluted history that goes along with that. But if they start taking that Black history out of Harper's Ferry, I think that's a location where people here in Western Maryland can contribute by going just a short drive down the road, and we can replace with humans that are there to provide that lesson, whatever it is that they remove.
I'll have a funny Harper's Ferry story. Well, it's not funny, I guess.
Sure.
But years ago, I was at Harper's Ferry, and there was a teacher there with some students, and he mentioned that John Brown had mental illness or whatever, which is all that's nonsense, whatever. So I referenced Du Bois's biography and others, and just said like, look, that's been debunked for a long time. Why are you telling that to these kids? And then he said, well, the victors write the story. Like, what are you talking about? I said, well, okay, then I'm deciding that I'm the victor, and I'm telling you that he was not a crazy person. He just recognized that we are human, that Black people, we are human beings, and because we are human beings, we are just as worthy of being fought for, just like anyone else. Our freedom matters, and you can celebrate, fighting to free someone else. You can celebrate fighting to free us as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we have to recognize that it did take fighting to resolve this problem in our country. But that is over. That is part of history. That progress, that price has been paid already. And as somebody who grew up here in Frederick County, and you see Antietam battlefield and Gettysburg battlefield, and you learn the history of the loss of life that it took to try to right that original sin that we had at the founding of our country, where while we said all men were created equal, we came up with a constitution that said some were only 3/5. And that is an original sin that we continue to try to address. So while there was a heavy price paid in order to make what progress we made, let's not backslide, but let's not go back to that level of violence. We talk about violence in our society today, and I would say that I disapprove of political violence, and I will say that for those of us on the left, we look to the history of peaceful resistance, nonviolent resistance to authoritarian approaches. We follow the examples that were presented by people like Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Reverend Luther King and Congressman John Lewis. These are the people that we follow as we move forward, because that price that was paid has already been paid. We do not need to go, we should not be going back to that level of violence again. And we need to recognize that the progress that we've made is progress, and we are going to hold on to that progress, and this is inevitable. It is inevitable that we will achieve this freedom. And while others may try to impose restrictions on our speech, we have a choice. That's part of the reason why I have a podcast. I see that the mainstream media is forfeiting their discretion in what they cover because they're being pressured. Because corporate America says, I would rather be able to have my merger than actually stand up for the facts that were presented on 60 Minutes. And so we need to do what we can in our own ways to counter the censorship that's occurring, and the best way is to speak up. And that's what I appreciate you all coming here to do with me today. And I want to thank everybody here. I will tell you, I got the idea for this from you listing off a list of things, and you mentioned Fugitive Pedagogy, and we're going on with your list. I said, wait a minute, let's get back to that. And I think this is an important and valuable discussion. But I also realized, especially the further I worked through the book, that I was inadequate to have a conversation about this topic. Casey haven't noticed, I'm an old white guy. So I am not an educator. So I appreciate the fact that I was able to bring somebody who has much more experience and knowledge and understanding of the book, and educators who understand that educational process. And I am grateful to you for helping present this, because I'm inadequate to do so, and I recognize that. So thank you all. I appreciate you being here. And so whenever we talk about problems, and we recognize that we have problems with censorship and with the way that things are going in our education environment, the fact that they're trying to use our educational systems to enforce that censorship. I always want to come up with solutions. I always want to have strategies where we can respond to that. Now, one of the things that we've discussed is replacing those places where they have started to impose censorship and finding outside approaches. I will recognize, and I think we've kind of talked about the concealed resistance that happens, and we'll recognize that there are other cases where people need to speak out openly. And I think that the choice of how you approach this varies very much individual to individual. And I think that whether you are forced to try to conceal your resistance but continue to resist, or whether you can speak out loudly and proudly, is something that depends upon a person's individual situation. And I think you said that also. So I want to re-emphasize that. Are there other strategies that you have to recommend for how we can respond to this? I'm opening up the floor for comment.
Well, first of all, I think it's, we all have agency, and we all have not just something to say, but ways in which we can share the truth as we know it, as we've experienced it. So while people may have different levels of comfort, it's also an organizing strategy to use people's, their voice, their privilege, their position, their lived experience to speak across the populace to people. And so I think we've got to remember that. And also that people carry different varying levels of risk in being, collaborative and collective in the work. In terms of a solution, I mean, as an educator, what I think is maybe the most powerful approach in the classroom is teaching strategies about truth finding, and how do you have a conversation about, like, how do you actually identify when someone is not following logical sense? How do you stop a conversation? How do you assert something that is a personal truth and not allow someone to move in on your in your space in a
Right.
conversation as well. So not just the strategy, not just the academic skills, but the social skills to have a conversation that advocates for yourself and people around you, and that also acknowledges that truth is not fungible always, right? It's,
Right.
and being willing to, in the classroom, if you're afraid to say, there are moments where you're like, okay, I'm gonna have to say this, and saying what you know the truth to be, and being willing to stand by your training, and your own knowledge. So I think there's real skill development we can do, not just with students, but in popular conversations as well. That we can do workshops on that. We really can.
So, are you volunteering?
Sure.
You have to be careful.
I know, so now it's recorded.
When I hear something like that, I'll then try to put you in touch with people who will help you host a workshop. So in addition to the workshop idea, you touched on misinformation and disinformation, and how we teach people the skills to detect that misinformation and disinformation. And I think that is very important. I look at, I'm a retired military officer. I will tell you that our nation is under siege with waves of misinformation and disinformation that are deliberately being planted by our enemies, particularly the Russians, also the Chinese, in order to disrupt our normal discourse. The governor of Utah specifically called that out in response to the latest victims of gun violence that occurred last week, because they seek to take opportunities like that to split Americans and divide Americans. And unfortunately, there are many people who are willing to work with them in order to spread false information. And I have to point out, if we're going to talk about misinformation and disinformation, that some of the response to the gun violence that occurred last weekend was to not just say, well, it's both sides who are engaging in political violence, but in fact to falsely claim that it's the left that is engaging in political violence. And so I would encourage everybody to do your own research, because when they say the data says something, ask them for the data. And if you're looking for data on that particular topic, I will refer you to the National Institutes of Health's library and the National Association of Sciences research that is posted there that clearly states that right-wing ideologies are the ones that are promoting the most violence in the United States, and they actually have a link on their website to the data. So when people start saying things, we need to counter. Frequently over the last several years, I've heard people on the right saying, "I've done my research, and I really want to know what double-blinded study it was." Because what they're really saying when they say I've done my research is, I saw it on the internet. And we need to be able to make sure that we teach people the skills to look at websites. Right now, in my office, we have Bing as the preferred search engine, and it has a entry page where you have all kinds of different stories that are supposedly in local newspapers. But most of those newspapers don't exist. Most of those cited newspapers where you see the little headline are created by AI, popularized by bot networks in order to push an agenda. And so you need to find reliable sources of information. And I hate to say it, but our reliable sources of information are disappearing. I grew up here in the Washington area. I was a newspaper boy when I was a kid. I didn't deliver the Washington Post. I delivered the Competitive newspaper, which has since gone out of business. But the Washington Post has succumbed to not providing the same coverage it used to. So I go to the New York Times now as my preferred news provider.
I'm a ProPublica or something else.
ProPublica. And part of what we're finding, please, other alternatives are welcome, because we know that we are not getting the truth, or we're not getting the full truth, if we stick to the old ways, which is part of the reason why, I think I said this earlier, that's part of the reason why when people said I need to start a podcast, I wanted to do a podcast. I want to talk about these things. I want to talk about the topics that other people are unwilling to face. So in terms of misinformation and disinformation, I believe that this misinformation and disinformation is actually part of a foreign attack on our country. They saw that America's vulnerability could be that we allow the freedom for people to say things, and if they just could get the volume up loud enough, that they could do damage to our country, and that's what they're doing. Do you have any?
I do.
Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Can I just push back a little bit on
Sure.
that? Because I think I'm teaching a class on conspiracy theories right now, and I think that it's important that we recognize that the misinformation and disinformation is all of our responsibilities, but it's largely driven by corporations that are engineering this at a larger level that we're also aware of our participation in, and complicit with, but not aware of the far-reaching impacts of it, which includes what you're talking about, right? In terms of foreign opportunities and vulnerability, and you're the intelligence guy, so I'll defer there. But I think it's a bigger picture than that. I think a lot of this has to do with our blind complicity with our participation in social media and that sort of thing. So I saw it nodding on the other side of the table. I want to hand it over to you all.
So I think there is a lot of it that is not foreign because it's all very familiar. So like, for example, when you had certain bad actors lying about Haitians stealing and eating pets. So these people, they're lying, but it's a familiar lie, right? Because people at least the same movement, we talked about earlier, there's been an authoritarian movement, a racist movement that's existed for a long time. So, it's the same kind of distortion and lies about Haitians that Baron de Vate was writing about, Haitian intellectual in the early 1800s, right, under Christophe's reign. So it's very familiar. It's not exactly foreign. It's something that's been done in the Western world and in this country specifically for a long time. So all of this stuff, we've seen iterations of it before. So whatever foreign elements it might be, this is something that's just been here. And so the ugliness is very familiar. Even the types of misinformation is very familiar. Carter G. Woodson was pushing back against some of those same kind of distortions about African people that we hear right now, just riffs on it. Some people talking about our intellectual capacity and so forth. That is all very familiar. So I think there's a lot of it's homegrown, and a lot of stuff of it is from something that has been continuous, that has never gone away. And then, it's kind of like, the thing is, there are always going to be people like that, and the problem is when they have the power to execute what they want to do. They're not going to go away. We have to make sure that they are not activated, and we have to politically overpower them. But
Can I
please
take from there, because it's a perfect spot. And then in connecting, Anne, with what you had to say, and looking at this misinformation and disinformation at a kind of a local looking level, which is kind of where I operate, is we look at the disinformation that's constantly being pushed out by members of our community who really align much more with the right. It is intended to align very specifically with the authoritarian government that we're under. You know, the things that Trump says are the things that they then go to find information to prove. And whether or not that's good information, bad information, faulty studies, which we see quite frequently being brought into Board of Education meetings dealing with our LGBTQ students and our transgender students, they'll find or make up the disinformation. And I think one of the strategies that we need to do is to not only be informed, but be willing to stand and push back on that. When I look ahead to this next election in 2026 and this next year with this Board of Education that we currently sit under, it's a little frightening because honestly, they are pushing these authoritarian things. They pushed 35 books to be banned. And when you go back and you look through that list of books, the primary reason for all of those books to be banned was either because it deals with race issues or it deals with LGBTQ issues. And these are issues that students identify with because they're situations that they're in. And I've been working my way through all 35, and I can tell you the books are powerful. And for students who have lived the experience or are trying to understand the experience of others, there's a piece to that that needs to be there for students and to be available. Frederick County has ways to give parents rights to be able to make decisions for their students if they need to limit them in some capacity, because there are reasons why you might want to limit your child from certain types of books because of their own history, their own, where they are developmentally, those kinds of pieces. But that all exists. The idea of taking these books and banning them from all schools and from all children simply takes away that ability for people to recognize truth in their own experiences and seeing it through others' eyes and being able to kind of recognize and play those complete picture within our school libraries. But we've got to be willing to stand up and push back against this disinformation and do it vocally and do it often. Because if we don't, they get that information out, and then people in the community just begin to believe it. And then it becomes the truth because they've said it enough. And we see that beginning to happen with different elements, here within our school system. We are also significantly close to having to take over our Board of Education and having that authoritarian type structure brought into our Board of Education in this next election cycle. And their first 3 targets, they have said that they want to push back on our Policy 443, which is for our transgender, gender nonconforming students, our anti-racism policy, and book bans. That's where they're headed, and it's exactly lined up with the things that we've been seeing. And these things are not new, but there's a level and a tenor to them that is not something that I've seen. I've been an activist in education for years and years now. This is a level of intensity and a level of disinformation that I've never seen within my lifetime. I'm sure it's been there, but within my lifetime and within this county, I haven't seen it. So I think we need to be well aware of what's happening. We need to make sure people understand the importance of those down ballot elections, and that voting alphabetically doesn't work. Which is that many people will tell us that they have done on the Board of Ed elections is just voted alphabetically.
I've heard that.
So that would be my solution, is just standing up to disinformation.
Let me kind of re-emphasize some of those points. You talked about the problems of book bans. Solution for book bans: as soon as you hear a title that's being banned, go buy it. Don't just buy it, read the book, and then give it to somebody else.
Yeah.
Or in some cases, buy multiple copies of the book. Share.
And then write the letter to the Board of Education explaining why you think it shouldn't be banned. Because they want to hear from people. They want to hear from the community. So let them know why you think that book's important.
And read it in your lab if you have to.
I do want to commend FCPS on how they have handled the book banning situation, where they've involved the community in being part of the panel that makes those decisions.
Yes,
forward.
and only one of those books of the 35 was actually removed, and it was a book that they found was much more appropriate for truly 30, 40-year-old people, and not necessarily teenagers, and so they all felt that was one that they could slide out of the system. But the other 34 remain in the schools.
The other thing is the importance of voting. That's a solution. That's really the ultimate solution for all of these problems, to make sure at every opportunity, everyone gets out to vote. We need to make sure that, I mean, yes, we need to push back every day in a constant way, but in particular, when we have the opportunity to vote, that's where we need to make sure that we vote. I know you're a candidate. I know Jessica Douglas has declared as a candidate. I will tell you that I will support both of you as candidates. So if you're looking for an endorsement, you just got it. Because we need to make sure that we preserve these freedoms. And the worst, I mean, you talk about the fact that they're trying to attack the LGBT issues. The worst problems that we have here in Frederick County are not whether or not a trans student uses the bathroom. The worst problem that we have is that we have young males who are assaulting people, sexually assaulting people, and that is where we need to focus our attention. We need to focus our attention where there's actually a problem. And the more that we distract with things that don't even exist, I mean, I don't know. Personally, I have never been inside the girls' room at one of our local schools, but the last time, I believe, and you can tell me if I'm right, that there are stalls in there.
Yes.
So you don't even know who's next to you. So this nonsense about discussing what restroom someone is going to use is nonsense. When we have actual cases of young adult males who are physically and sexually assaulting other students, that's the problem. And so we have to, if we are not honest about what the problem is, then we're not going to make progress in fixing it.
And I think we need to really center conversations of harm and data around harm, because this perception that certain people are being harmed by books or being harmed, which people are we talking about, right? And let's get clear on where we want to put our tax dollars in public education and our public higher education institutions, for which students are being harmed and how are they being harmed. Because I think when you start figuring out where the harm is coming from.
And let's use data.
Yeah, right.
As opposed to just subjective feelings. Let's look at some of that data that comes in.
But there's also a place for feelings too,
There
where if we operate from the assumption that every human being is a person, like Tutun Simun, every person is a person, then we can look at trans people, we can look at any person, any people, and decide that we want them to have their rights respected, and we're going to push back when people are making up lies about whatever person, whatever type of person, in order to increase their own power. Because, yeah, I mean, that's the only reason why they're doing this. They have these ideologies where they're dehumanizing people, exploiting people, and that allows them, that empowers them. That is what all of that is for. So we have to push back and say, no, this is a person, we're all people, and we're going to operate accordingly.
And I'm going to kind of, and I guess this is kind of a wrap up. I think that one of the beauties of America is the fact that we have diversity, that we are inclusive, that we stand for equality. And when people attack things like that, it makes no sense to me, because that is what has made America great. America has this magnificent collection of people from different cultures, people from different ethnic backgrounds, people with different colors. And we've come to realize that it's not really a melting pot. That's what they called it when I was a kid. It's a tapestry. It's a tapestry. As all of these different colors, these different ethnicities are woven together into one common fabric. But the interesting thing about a tapestry is when somebody tries to pull on it and they try to tear it, the rest of the threads get pulled together even tighter. And that's what we need to recognize, and that's what gives me the hope as we look at the situation that we're in. We've been in worse times, and if you don't, if you think we haven't, just go to Antietam or go to Gettysburg.
Read this.
Yeah, or read this. But the more that they try to tear us apart, the truth is that drives us together. And let's accept that. Let's embrace that. That's what gives me the hope that as we move forward, we're not gonna wind up in an authoritarian society. We are not going to accept that. And I want to thank you all for joining me today. I appreciate your contributions. And I'm very grateful that you took the time to do this. None of us are getting paid for this. You get my gratitude and appreciation. But I also think that we got the opportunity to take a tough topic and bring it up and start looking at it. And so I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity. If you have any last things that you want to say.
I think hope is a strategy. I didn't make that up. Someone much smarter than I did said that originally. I'll have to remember who it was, but I think hope is a strategy, and I think that it is the time for us to continue to not just educate ourselves, but be open, look around us at the people who are not involved, the people who are disengaged, and start our conversations with them today, tonight, tomorrow.
That's another strategy that we can have. I always said that we need.
Open.
Yeah, we need to make sure that we're trying to fix the problems that we're talking about. Cassie, anything that you want to add?
My last minute thoughts would be that, for me at least, because my students are young, they're still children until some of those almost graduating kids or not. But I look at our children and the fact that we still have a responsibility to protect them. And we have to be willing to stand in that gap. And I've told a lot of people, I get kind of mama bear, a little feisty when you mess with my kids. And my children are grown, but I still get feisty. But my students, if you mess with my students, you come for them, you start talking things and doing things, it's absolutely going to, have to be an opportunity. But as a community, we need to be making sure, like you were saying, every child is a person. And every child deserves that same respect and deserves that same, need for feeling safe and welcome and seen within the curriculum and within the materials and within the instruction that we have within our schools. So that would be my takeaway piece.
Okay.
We'll continue learning, learn with other people, don't make it an individual thing, learn in community, and find an organization, a group of people that will empower you to push back against authoritarianism and create the kind of community you want to live in, preserve what you want to preserve, and try to ensure that all people are treated as people.
All right, you were the one that thought of the topic, and I want to make sure you had the last word, so thank you very much. I appreciate it. And that's all that we have.